Five, four, three, two, one. Ready.
Well, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. This is going to be a talk with regards to medical issues. We've got two components that are associated. One, we've got 5 topics on the table that we will talk about. And then we have, as you know, the medical task force, which has been meeting throughout the last calendar year, and we'll talk on some of the things that we've talked about during that time. And this is pretty much an open meeting, so we can take questions pretty much at any time on the topics that we talk about. I would like to reserve perhaps the last 15 minutes or so of each hour to go over some of the things that we may have talked in the previous 45 minutes. I do not have any expectation for anyone to stay on for the total period of time. I understand about time and the issues that we all have to deal with. But we set it up so that it would be pretty much an open mic and allow ideas to be able to flow. As always, I'm honored to do this. And collectively, I think that we can maintain the history that we've had of the WBC and being progressive, being attentive, and also moving in a very wise direction when we're trying to choose something on the medical. I know that there are a number of topics that are very special to individuals. There are folks who are very passionate about that. My basic position is that I would like for us to move in the way that medical science has shown us, in an unbiased way. And if we don't have that, to allow things like the input of everyone who collectively, we probably will have several hundreds of years of being involved on the medical side, or if not that, just observation about what happens, so that we can weigh whatever decision we may need to come to. We've got everyone on this, so it's not restricted to the physicians as we would normally have during the medical meeting. And I think that that's great. The more input we can get, the better it is. The one presentation that I will do will be with regards to the weight management, dehydration, and the 15% weight allowance at the second day weigh-in. Actually, why don't we start off with that first? There's a PowerPoint presentation. Is that being handled through Mexico, or am I?
Yes, I'm going to put it in. I'm going to share it in screen, Doctor.
Okay, very good. Well, while it's coming up, the true issue is that as they say, the elephant in the room. When we're looking at fights, and you don't have to be a fight fan, one says, wait a minute, these guys are supposed to be 140 pounds. This is what they're women. This is a welterweight fight, and these guys are walking in at 164, literally, sometimes up to 20% of what they weighed in. So in a 24-hour period, they have gained 20% of their body weight. It doesn't take a physician to know that that's not good for you, that that's not something that should be happening. And I think it is truly one of the most unfair realities that we allow to happen in boxing. And that is, if you're fighting for a 140 title, there's no way that you should be 2 or 3 weight classes ahead when you get into the ring. it's extremely difficult to stop this type of practice. But okay, well, we'll be able to see some of it now. It's been spelled out. You can go on to the next slide, please. Full screen. Great. So I won't read over this. I'll allow everyone time to read. And I will somewhat apologize because I am using California information. This is where we have an ongoing study, and we've actually been looking at this for over 10 years. But we seriously got involved with it in the last 3 years, and we've been able to gather information. Now, folks, I would like for folks to mute their speakers because we're getting a lot of feedback.
And promoters from all over the world. I am happy to welcome.
So
I'm gonna do.
I understand that people are listening to
Roberto Diaz,
the other part. William is
Carl Moretti from Top
the
Rank,
speaker that you have on in the back.
Samson Dukowitz from Samsung LLC, Bang Kai Chai from.
According to my computer,
How do you pronounce your promotion?
Yeah. transmitting.
The promotion is Nakolwan promotion.
Ah, good.
Of course, Nakolwan promotion.
Okay, thank you. So what's happening is, and I think we all know, and I'm sorry, I'm preaching to the choir here, is that individuals will do an often extreme weight cut prior to the time that they have a weigh-in. It is essentially up to the ringside physician to be able to identify signs of dehydration. And we've certainly seen many of them throughout the years. The ironic part about this is that many boxers will tell you that the hardest fight was to make the weigh-in weight that they were contracted to. The issue or problem is after that. And we've seen, as I've mentioned before, folks have up to 20+% of their body weight regained from rehydration in less than 24 hours, and then go out and fight a 10-round or 12-round fight. That certainly it puts their health at risk. Unfortunately, like so many other things in dealing with combat medicine, and that's boxing medicine or mixed martial arts medicine, is that we can't prove anything. I'm going to show you some slides. There's some people who gain weight and win. There's some people who don't gain the weight and lose. It goes across the board, but there's clearly no one indication. But again, sometimes I take off the doctor's hat and just put on being a regular citizen, being a regular person. You know that changing even 5% of your body weight. Now, we have other doctors who are on who will tell you that if you're going in for a surgery, if you're going in for an elective surgery, if you've got 5% dehydration, the anesthesiologist is not going to allow you to have that surgery. Yet we have people walking around losing or regaining 10%, 20% of their body weight, and then we're allowing them to fight. What I'm hoping to show you here is that we're going to take the fringe, those who are over 15 or equal to or over 15% of their body weight in a 24-hour period, and they will be automatically excluded. You'll see what a small number that is, but remember that I told you, you can't go into the operating room at 5% dehydrated. These individuals will go, and we're doing, yes, we have to do an extrapolation because when they're coming in, we see what the difference is from when they have the weigh-in, which is normally 24 to 30 hours prior to the contest, and they get weighed when they arrive at the arena for that contest on that night. So in that period of time is usually about 24 hours, and they have regained anywhere between 10 to 14.9%. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay, so you can take a look at what the numbers are, and you know that from normal studies, these are some quite hefty numbers. 1,500, almost 1,600 boxers that are included. You see the number of bouts that are there, and you see what the average weight change is in pounds. So let's say about 4.2 kilograms. So we're talking about, and that average weight change is about 7%. So we're talking about double what the norm is and more, 1% more for these individuals, and we're saying it cannot go past that. Next slide, please. This is from 2019, I should say, and you can see where it goes 1% exceeded 15% of the body weight change. I am not happy, in case one thinks that my proposal was at 15%. I thought that we should start at 10%, but I also recognize what's most important is educating both the participants and those around and start moving that number down. We've been doing it now for the last 3 years. And I think as we get on the international stage, that would be an appropriate time to move from 15 down to 12, down to 10, down to 7%. We are going to allow, but we need to start somewhere. Next slide, please. So in looking at our title bouts, you see that there have been 11 and the other international bodies. Now, some of you may remember that we had a joint meeting, an historic meeting that President Suleiman put together, well, participated in, I should say, but the WBC at that moment agreed that 15% would be one where the WBC, we had an agreement from all of the bodies that were there, with the exception of the WBO, which did not want to commit at that time, but we're still working on them to, across the board, for our sanctioning bodies to accept this 15% is an automatic cutoff from what goes on. Now, also understand, if you're gaining this much or regaining this much weight, there's questions with regards to your training, not to mention just the whole electrolyte difference that's going in and out during that period of time. I truly believe that this is probably one of the most dangerous things that we still allow to happen in boxing. Next, please. So you may recognize certainly the fighters and some of the fights, and you can see what the change is. Here, I think that the most important part is looking at what the ratio was of rehydration, or how much percentage that they were over their weigh-in. And you can take a look at the wins and losses, which I mentioned do not follow any certain pattern. And we looked at that at 7%, 10%, 12%, 15%, and there's no significant difference, or as many of the physicians or scientists would like to talk about, statistically significant change in win-loss. But I think that we're talking at a higher level than just wins and losses. We're talking about, is this situation safe? Is this a baseline in which we would like for our contestants to start the participation in doing theoretically 12 extremely hard rounds, and have their bodies have gone through what they did in the last 24. Next, please. Again, you can see on your own, I won't go over the individual slides, but you can see how none of these, with the exception of Kusta, down at the bottom, has exceeded the 15. Go again. Next slide, please. One of the things that we certainly clearly know, every contender are looking at champions and want to copy what they do. My position has been, if the WBC, we are at the top of the mountain. And if we're going to make changes, we have to start there. If you're going to wear the green belt, you're going to have to comply with all of our health and safety regulations and rules. But we need to start focusing our attention on getting these boxers to train throughout the year, to not allow their weights to fluctuate sometimes by 50 and even as much as 90 pounds. I've gotten stories that I've been able to verify about just how much weight some of these boxers have had to lose to be able to fight for their title, not to mention the things that happen in between. And we always rave about, next slide, we always rave with regards to boxers such as Hopkins or Mayweather, of how they always look like they're in shape. That's something that we certainly would like to stress to those who have chosen that to be professional boxers, that it is not just the days that you're in a ring, it's not just the days that you're in training camp, but there's a general, let's say, fluctuation of your weight that should be more healthy. We think that that will increase their physical conditioning throughout their training camp, and will also not have these big swings right before their fight. Next, please. Next. There are a few more like this, but I wanted to show you, this isn't some random, we're just picking out one or two or picking on a particular fighter or even a weight class. It goes across. Now, obviously, we don't weigh that in the take weights for the heavyweight. There's no maximum that you can do. And obviously, there's some question now with regards to, is one truly a heavyweight if you're 200 pounds fighting against somebody who's 254 pounds? That 54-pound difference we seem to have thrown to the wayside, that why we even have different categories for that, but that's a different discussion for a different day. Next, please. Next. 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 Now, you know, these are, and I'm sure you're getting tired of taking a look at this. They won't last that long. These are title bouts. So I'm not talking about the hundreds to thousands of other times that we have seen boxers who are, again, I think exploiting what the rules are, understanding that most places in the world don't have second day weigh-ins, and are coming 2, 3, 4 weight classes above by the time that they get in the ring. Next. Next. I think there are 2 more. Next. Okay, so again, taking a look at what's going on. This was mixed martial arts. Let's go past that. The boxing, we'll deal with that one alone. Next. Kickboxing, next. So any of the combat sports are what we've taken a look at. If you could go back on the slide, please, to where it's talking about just the boxing. I think that's in either the 3rd or 4th slide. Go to slide 6, I believe. Right. So with that, the compromise was we have to start somewhere. So we looked at that 1% exceeding 15%, decided that that's where it would be. Unilaterally, we could certainly, as the WBC, say it's less than that. My recommendation would be, let's start at 15 and move our way down as we follow what goes on. And certainly there's going to be one, maybe two people who violate that, and their bout is, they cannot fight for the title. And the particular jurisdictions have their own penalty in terms of, are they going to fine the boxer? Will it continue or it won't? Our recommendation is if they exceed 15%, that the bout is canceled. I'd like to open it up now, Ricardo, and see the comments individuals might have. Anyone have any thoughts with regards to cutting off or stopping a bout from, or preventing a bout from happening if there's one of the boxers or both who exceed 15% of their body weight from their weigh-in?
What is going to happen, doctor, if one of the boxers goes over the 15%, the other one would be able to get the title, but if we cancel the bout, maybe we're taking out that opportunity.
And the one part about this, and I misspoke, as the medical committee, we aren't going to do whatever punishment there may be. We're just setting a number of where that might come into effect. There are some places that are saying that if you're over 10%, you're going to get fined X amount of dollars. If you're over 12%, you'll have another amount. But if you're over 15%, then you won't fight. I don't know what the I don't know what penalty the WBC might have, but it's as so many other things. If you violate something, either the bout is canceled or there's significant penalties that are associated with it. But medically, as I mentioned, what I want to do is to start moving closer and closer to having folks fight at their true and real weight. You cannot be a welterweight and you're fighting at a super middleweight weight when you get into the ring. Pat, what do you have to say?
Would you refresh my recollection on one thing, please? When are you doing the second weigh-in? What time?
The second weigh-in is done at the time the boxer arrives at the arena on the day of the fight. One of the things that has happened, there's different organizations and people are doing that, but the boxers were gaming that. And what would happen is they'd say that there'd be an 8 o'clock weigh-in the next morning. They would make weight. And by the time 5 o'clock or 12 hours later, when they were fighting, they'd be 10% difference than when they were that morning. There are those who believe that if there's a rule, it's meant to be broken or to find some way around it. And that's how they've been doing it. So I applaud those organizations who have said, okay, yes, we'll have a second day weigh-in, but the boxers have already figured out, and sometimes even with their PhD trainers, how to game that. You can't do that if you're going to do that when you arrive at the arena, and then there are inspectors, so there's no IVs that are allowed once you've reached the arena.
Well, there's no IVs allowed anyway, in theory.
Well,
in theory.
In theory. Some of my ringside docs don't know to check in between the toes. Any other comments or thoughts with regards to having a maximum weight to be able to participate? Doc, go ahead, speak.
Just a couple quick things. One is,
who are you, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Nick Rizzo. I'm on the Illinois Boxing Commission and ARP board, and longtime admirer of Paul's.
Well, you're a ringside physician. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to mention that we need to keep in mind one of the purposes of this is the competitive advantage that someone can have if they drop 1 to 2 weight classes improperly. They can gain a height advantage, they can gain a reach advantage, and they can gain a weight advantage. So it's a multifaceted benefit that these guys are shooting for. So I agree with Paul wholeheartedly. It's, you know, where the goal is to ultimately have this result in fighters fighting at the proper weight for those reasons too.
This is a quiet. I need to get on something that's more controversial, apparently. All right. Mario, any thoughts?
Dear Paul, I am satisfied. It's clear, no problem. It's important, the ratio, always. And energetic balance.
All right.
I have another comment, Dr. Paul. Have you identified if there are, what happens if a boxer does it twice? I mean, because a boxer that had a cut weight problem will always have cut weight problem. That's normally what happens. I mean, some boxers never have problem with cut weight and dehydration, and some does.
Well, I would hope that this would be an incentive for that person to start cutting weight a lot sooner. We've already got in our mandatory days in which they're supposed to have their weights done. But we found out even in that people have dieted down so that they can have their 30-day weight, then they go back up and then they go back down. It's just a matter of, again, why we try to give someone a good and clear guideline on what you should do within safe parameters. They've learned how to game that also. So we want to make it a bit tougher. And as I said, you saw from the 1,600 people that we had for boxing alone that we're talking about 1%. But in the slides that I showed you, there were still 3 or 4 of our own WBC fights where people had exceeded that. Again, the argument is, well, there's an advantage to gaining all this weight. And what we see is that that's not a true advantage. So let me ask the second question. What do you think would be a reasonable time frame to go from 15 down to 12? A year? 2 years?
We will have to have more information. We have to start with 15 worldwide, and then having more information, and maybe 1 year to 12, cut it to 12, or depending on the results.
Well, I think that my opinion is that for the vast majority of people, and we always know that there will be some folks who are beyond, is that people are going to comply to that because that's what the rules are. And as it gets tighter, they will also get tighter. And I think, again, we are the leaders and we need to show that we need to lead. We need to start. We need to be zero tolerance. And there's going to be an individual who is going to test us. And we're doing this based on the health of not only that individual, but I think even more so, because I understand the argument, well, they're putting their own self at risk and they're adults and they're signing off on that. My concern is their opponent. Now, there's no other we would say that we're going to allow 164 and 140 to fight. we wouldn't do that. But we close our eye on a regular basis with the rule that we have for weigh-in. Now, there's also that all of you know, and many of you participated back in the old days when the weigh-ins were on the same day of the fight. And you didn't have this type of problem because there wasn't enough time for them to regain, to rehydrate that much. And their trainers, the boxers and their trainers, trained for that and know that they would not have an opportunity to do it. We also know how big of an event a weigh-in is now. It's a huge moneymaker for especially the big fights. And there's no way that we're going to be able to cut that part out. But that doesn't mean that we should turn a blind eye to what's safe for both the boxer and their competitor. That's the purpose of this. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of pushback. And yes, there may be some administrative things that need to go, but I think that we're real clear in terms of the medical aspect of it, and we can move on. I think one of the other topics that we need to talk about is women's boxing and the position that the WBC has at this time, which are the championship rounds for women will be, well, all of them will be 2 minutes. There's a long history that's associated with, but I will actually use some information that I had a discussion with the Jill. Actually, Jill, would you like to say it? I was going to repeat what you stated, if she's on. I'll start anyway, and that is, if you think back to 1983, with the tragedy that happened at that time, the WBC seriously looked into how many rounds are we fighting? What type of damage is happening? And a decision was made at that time to go from 12 rounds, from 15 rounds to 12 rounds. Again, this was without all the data that we're requesting on some of our other things, but a decision was made after the experience of hundreds and hundreds of rounds and hours of individuals talking about what happened between the 12th and the 5th, what used to be considered the championship rounds then. Oh, there was push, people saying it's going to be the end of boxing and it was the worst thing that could possibly ever happen. Now, other than us old folks, people didn't even know that it goes 50. They think they're smart and saying, oh, rounds. So the time has come where in the men's, and again, I'm talking about the men's side, we're taking a look, moving from rounds to 10 rounds. Our juniors, I'm reading our quick conversation, WBC being health and safety, and on the men's side, moving down from 15 rounds to 12 rounds to the discussion and moving at 10 rounds for non-world title fights. I was giving you all the credit. I wasn't stealing any of the thunder through that. Did you want to add anything as
Joe?
The mic's not on. Ooh, we lost it.
Wrong button.
Jill, we still can't hear you. She'll get on when she's getting on. But the point is that we continue to notice things that have gone on. I can tell you something that I'm very interested in now. And for those who are researchers and looking into it, I'm very concerned with regards to these younger boxers who are challengers, who are being moved up very quickly in terms of being able to fight a title fight. I contradict myself because I always go, and this is another important point. There has been, and again, it is not a hard and fast rule about how long it takes to move up the ladder. But I'm seeing more and more of these younger boxers who haven't had what I consider a good foundation at being able to fight at 6 rounds, at 8 rounds, and at 10 rounds. There is a huge transition from being able to high school football or soccer, whichever way we go, to be able to play college, to be able to play pro, to be able to play in the Premier League. There's a huge difference between. Say an amateur fighting around professional fight. There are a few who can do it, and few indeed. But it is a major difference in fighting a 4-round fight than it is an 8-round. An 8-round than it is 10 rounds. For some of you who have seen my lectures over the years, in which maybe I'll do again the time we meet, there's been a straight section. I mean, there's been a very statistical analysis done about classes and when boxers are hurt. I won't go through all of that, but I can tell you round 8 is a major. We're talking about hurt being having neurologic damage or death. 8 is bigger than 10. 10 is bigger than 12. So as we talk about boxers who are moving quickly up the ranks, 1 or 2 6-round fights, and yes, there are some outliers there. Those who have had, especially some of our Eastern European fighters who have had 300 amateur fights, have been fighting at the top level, who have been training with professionals, as they shouldn't be, but knowing what goes on. So I'm not talking necessarily about everyone, but there's a general concern. I'm going to swing this all the way back to what the initial question was, and looking and talking about fights, WBC, being 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes. In California, we had a meeting inviting everyone and having some discussion with regards. There were many discussions in terms of, there were some of the female boxers who felt as though that the size of purses that the males got because they were fighting 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes. There were those who were still
Dr. Wallace, I don't know if it's just me, but I've lost your audio.
Can people hear me now?
Actually, the whole screen
Hello.
is frozen.
Ricardo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Dr. Wallace.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but your screen is
Mario,
frozen.
My screen is frozen.
Yeah,
Okay.
it moves slowly. It moves slowly.
You're moving now.
No, that's just me. I'm old.
Can everyone hear me now? I just changed platforms.
Okay, we've just gotten something on Glow.
Is it any better now?
Well, we can hear you. That's what counts.
Okay. I will switch. I will switch also what goes on. Anyway, we can talk about that. Can anyone else? Is there any input, any thoughts with regards to 2 minutes versus 3 minutes?
Well,
Doctor, I'm going to show you the task force information, that the minute that we did in February. It talks about the women's issues. Look, I'm going to share it with everybody.
I just want to know if you can hear me. Can anyone hear me? No one can hear me. Okay. Everyone's frozen?
Do you see it?
Yes.
This is the information about women boxing that you did. What we talk about it, Dr. Wallace. Are you able to see the screen about the information about women and boxing issues?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I can see this.
That's what we discussed 4 months ago, Dr. Wallace, in UCLA. Do you remember?
So these are some of the points that were made with regards to differences of males and females participating. Or unfortunately, a lot of things have to be extrapolated other sports. As was mentioned to me earlier, things that happen in the military. There's just not a lot of, with regards to combat sports, certainly not anywhere equivalent to almost any of the other sports, because we don't have a sponsor. We don't have Major League Soccer. We don't have the NFL, NBA. We have individuals who are spread out all over the world, and it's difficult being able to collect information, especially when you don't have any authority over them to do so. So, but the data that we do have certainly is good data. And the problem that we have is in making the decision to deregulate or any rule or regulation that in theory could make something more dangerous is a very difficult thing to do. As being a scientist and for 31 years, one have information so that I can stand on it and saying based on this information is the reason why. And I want it to be science. Certainly around the world, we know right now dealing with COVID-19 and all of the different vaccines that are coming out, there is a protocol on how we've done that for the last 50 years. The privilege working with the United States Army, working on malaria vaccine. I worked in Thailand, Korea, Panama. I worked Kenya in trying to find a vaccine that met the standards of all other vaccines. We came close at about 80%, but the threshold is 92% of those who would be vaccinated to have some immunity. So we failed along the way. Why do I bring that up? I have some information as to what the true statistics are for female involved in combat sports, so that we can clear answer and say based on X number of fights and female we've been able to look at over the years. I think that we are prepared as the WBC if we can get all of our partners. As I look around, we've got people all over the world start to put together this information. But before we do so, I think that we may off of an emotional rather than an academic reason on making a change. Comment?
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh boy, it's taken me 3 platforms and Paul's help. The issue with women's boxing 2 to 3 is a very emotional issue as much as a actual physical issue. I mean, they feel the whole basis of the fight has to do with the fact that they feel they don't get the respect or the money that men do. When you look at other countries where the women are doing 210s, where they're headlining a lot more and for many more years than they did in the United States, you have to feel that a lot of it is cultural. The information that we've gone on has been based on not combat sports, but actual combat from the army, from this and that and whatever, from pink concussion and whatever. And as Paul said, you have to do a dedicated study to know whether or not, but but we just reduced men's rounds to 10 for all regional, and women's sports across the board have different rules for different reasons. But this is such an emotional issue and it's such a cultural issue that I think we really need the facts, because the big claim is that we're basing everything on sexism versus science. And I would rather err on the side of safety, but the facts would be ultimately very, very useful.
Any other comments or thoughts, experiences, opinions?
My only question would be, is there anything that we could extrapolate or draw from MMA as far as that data is concerned? Because they still fight 5-minute rounds in a championship or main event.
The answer isn't can they, but should they? Men could also fight 15 rounds. And I'm not really, I'll go to 3 minutes the minute Dr. Paul says go to 3 minutes. But you can't really compare either MMA to boxing, I don't think, but there are a lot of similarities.
No, I agree. That's not a direct comparison. Now, I've only worked pro MMA fights. Don't have a lot of experience with the amateur MMA fights. But I haven't seen anything that would turn my head in particular that would raise alarms for me. That doesn't mean it's not there. And that's only my anecdotal experience, which means nothing. But I was just wondering if anybody had any other thoughts, if they could extrapolate or make any kind of comparison or not. That's all.
Dr. Wallace, sorry I joined your meeting a bit late. I was struggling with this.
Is, as I've seen, witnessed, heard, oftentimes it is the most exciting of the night. But my belief is, from what I have been told by promoters, it has nothing to do, the amount of money that they get has nothing to do with buying 2 minutes versus 3 minute rounds. There is clearly a discrepancy in terms of the pay is, but I don't believe that it is because you're fighting 2 minutes versus 3 minutes.
Hello.
However, again, as Jill said, I'm more than willing to, and I'm always taking in information, and this is a permanent topic at each of our meetings. We want to gather the information. Now,
hello,
I
Dr. Wallace.
It would be appropriate to put together, and we do a formal study with regards to injury. The Association of Ringside Physicians to with a joint proposal of how this can be done around the world, so that we can gather as much information as we can in the shortest period of time. And we have a number of scholars. I see one from New York right now, who we can determine the minimal number of participants we had, statistically significant as we forward in this decision. I think that I really anyone who's saying no, that physiologically it can't happen. What I know are folks who can't say that there is any less risk. The information as it stands right now, and I believe you saw, we can put it up once again. Actually, Ricardo, would you do that? The information from the task force,
Yes.
things that we know that are just there. For example, the size of the neck, the size of the muscles which are there. Yes, that doesn't talk about the number of hits that go to the head. That doesn't talk about the amount of power, but it does say something physiologically on what one can, the maximum amount of mass that can be used to cause a torque and a turn. It is still unknown, and for years there's been some discussion on understanding what happens during the menstrual cycle, and whether there should be an allowance for with regards to the amount of weight, and overwhelmingly, Bill, please correct me if my experience is different. There would be no allowance in terms of what the weight should be. Am I incorrect in that, or has the time changed? There should be tolerance.
We make a 1 pound allowance for women for the menstrual.
Okay, so
Hello,
1
hello.
pound
Can I?
allowance,
Hello,
and
hello,
you know,
hello,
from my experience
hello,
from being with the between my daughters and the rest of that, that's
hello. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Paul.
Hello, can somebody hear me?
I certainly have known large changes that have happened through there, but I think that a woman, I think that it's only reasonable and logical to have the majority of the participants weigh in on a rule such as that. Issues with regards to the wiring of the actual neurology that goes on. These are some of the things that we've talked about. We still need to look on. So there needs to be an exercise physiologist. There needs to be
Hello.
There need to be a number of factors that we on the way. If we look at knockouts and the number that happen, even in the 2-minute rounds, tell you, for example, there's in the fight I've worked in all of these years, there's a tremendously over amount of head blows as compared to body shots in women. To what degree or significance that has, other than a general part in saying that there are more head blows that they serve than what I find in the typical men or men boxing at certain levels. I don't know if that is part or not. I would leave that to the neurologist to put in their input about those minor traumas that happen along the way. The types of knockouts that happen, severity of knockouts, and thank goodness we don't have to deal almost at all with the fatalities that are associated with the boxing itself. But if you on YouTube and you take a look and see what both the mixed martial artists and the boxers, both men and female, about what the issues that we saw earlier about dehydration and rehydration, and then going in. I don't know if the males are any safer than the females. I certainly want to cut out for the males. And many of the habits that copied smarter, caught up in how you do things. I think that it can be safer, far more entertaining, and give a better quality of what the art of boxing is, rather than some of the old habits of males. Is there any other discussion with regards to 3 rounds versus rounds?
Hello?
Can I just say one thing? I would love for the research to say women could do it, because really everyone says because I'm WBC that I am holding on to the 2-minute round. Boxing is dangerous. We want people to have a life after boxing. This was the initial research we got. We're going to stay with it, but it is what it is at this point. And I think a specific research project would be great that could determine whether or not it was safe for women or any different in a dangerous sport, 2 to 3. But we're not clinging to that because of any old-fashioned ideas, or that. It would be a thrill to be able to take away all the criticism and letters that I get from women that want to go to 3. So please, let's fix this.
Yes, I know. I hear you loud and clear. And as I said, first order of business for any of the board members of the ARP, out of form that we do an international study with regards to women's boxing in all aspects, but for the purpose of one of our major points we look at is being able to go from 2 rounds, 2 minutes to 3 minutes per round. Then that also would bring on the discussion on whether we increase the number of rounds that are associated. So a broad topic, and I recognize that we can only take a piece at a time, but I'd like for us to do so.
Paul, if I may say a few words, I think one thing which you really cannot defend as a neurologist, you cannot defend boxing by saying boxing is good for the brain. So no amount of boxing is good for the brain. It's irrespective whether it's 10 rounds, 12 rounds, and also the duration of the rounds. So,
Doc, could you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, sure. I'm Dr. Nitin Sethi. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the New York State Athletic Commission. I'm a neurologist by training. I'm very passionate about concussions and traumatic brain injuries and preventing them in boxers. So what a point I was trying to make here is that, when we debate this in a body of neurologists, you really cannot stand up and say boxing is good for the brain. No amount of boxing is good for the brain, whether it's 1 round, whether we are talking about 10 rounds. Same thing applies to the duration of boxing, whether the round is 3 minutes or 2 minutes. So I completely agree with Paul. While there's certainly a lack of data which you can really conclusively say that 3 minutes rounds boxing is bad for a woman, for a woman boxer as compared to a 2-minute round. You can certainly make the argument that you are getting less exposure to head blows because every punch is thrown at the head. So you can say cumulatively, maybe over that fight, if the fight was 2-minute rounds as compared to 3-minute rounds, that fight, both the fighters cumulatively had less head shots as compared to when they were fighting 3-minute rounds. But whether that translates into protecting the fighter's health both acutely in the ring and chronically, that means when their career is over, that we don't have scientific evidence to back it up. So we need some scientific evidence to say that the number of punches which a fighter gets over a period of time significantly changes between 3-minute rounds and 2-minute rounds. That's the way I would probably do the study. Some suggestions that even if you take a fighter and say, okay, if the fight was 3-minute rounds, the total number of punches taken by this fighter at the head were this much. Now, if the fight was 2-minute rounds, the total number of punches taken by the fighter was this much. So obviously there's less head trauma in a 2-minute round. but it will be hard then to make that connection whether long term that was beneficial to the fighter's health as compared to it didn't make any difference. For that, we need longitudinal studies which would be very hard to really scientifically conduct.
So, hi everyone. Sorry I joined late. Meteor Chat from UCLA. I think I've been introduced to many of you before, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm a neurologist, sports and neurotrauma trained. I'm wondering if there's a way to look retrospectively, like through video, like looking at kind of time segments during a fight and saying like, okay, in each of the rounds, you sustain blows, you know, in the first 30 seconds, the next 30 seconds, just taking different epochs of time and seeing how the increase over time. Sorry, is there an increase like with each epoch? Dr. Wallace, I wonder if you two things on, because I have two pictures of you. So I'm wondering if we can, like, you know, this would be kind of a quick.
Ahora, pues es ahora donde estamos. Va a entrar por Facebook y vamos a transmitir en la convención. ¿Qué prefieres? ¿En Facebook y en la convención o quieres poner en la convención más temprano, en Facebook más tarde? Como tú lo veas.
Here, I just muted the Ricardo. I hope that's okay, Ricardo. I'm sorry. I muted you. We could hear your background.
All right.
So in any case, I don't know if people were able to follow what I was saying, but just
could you summarize it or say it again? You can
sure.
I just want to.
If we were to design a study, obviously the best study would be to look prospectively at fights in the future, comparing 2 minute to 3 minute. Now, is there something that we could do in the meantime while we're designing that study? If we have video of fights, we can subdivide each round into epochs and look at where are the most blows occurring. That'll give us at least some idea of, are there significant hits coming in the, you know, in between the second and third minute in that epoch? And that would suggest that, sure, that's a more risky time as the fighters get more tired, as they're expending their energy, their reaction time decreases. And in that, you know, in those cases, we'd see the effects in that second and third, or sorry, in the third minute.
Hear nothing.
I think that's an excellent idea. I think that there's something that does need to be done retrospectively and prospectively while we're looking at that. The most difficult part of this is being able to select what parameters and what things that we are looking for to that will be the basis of making a decision to change. For example, we already know with regards to the cardiovascular, women can absolutely do this. But that's not what's being questioned. The issue is, and the difficult part, and why I think that it needs to be an international study, is we're looking at injury in particular. And injuries don't necessarily have to happen that frequently. We know that when they do happen, there are serious consequences and questions asked of why would you make a decision in something that everyone, whether it's male or female, that the more you do, the more dangerous it is. That doesn't stop us from looking into it. And I would certainly like to have someone slap down information, as they do in just about any other aspect of medicine. You know, I do, you know, I deal a lot with regards to autoimmune diseases. And if I have I've got a patient right now, we're actually doing some experimental treatment on. Well, I've got all of the wealth of information saying these are what the other treatments have. And I got a whole bunch of naysayers out saying, don't do that. And the only thing that I can do is to, with supervision and with some regulatory things is to see if I can't help this patient along the way. Not necessarily the best analogy or coming through, but it says that sometimes you do have to step outside the box, but we need to know what we're looking at. We need to know what we need to measure. And the big issue has been, I don't think if there'll be an increase with regards to injuries, I think by adding any more time, you certainly are going to have a possibility of having more. And that we have two comparisons. It would be against 2 minutes and also with regards to males. We have some of the information with regards to males, but that's not good either. We really don't have solid information that is unbiased, that has been thoroughly combed so that we can look at a specific idea. On the reason for from just direct doing this.
Dr. Wallace, you're frozen again, I'm afraid.
Science department and taking a look at weight classes and injuries or fatalities associated with it. And that's the kind of data that we have to go, again, from backwards to forward. But I think that your input and certainly continued passion to go help push this type of study forward. The Association of Ringside Physicians meeting is sometimes, it's coming up soon, isn't it? For the board members that are on, isn't the meeting coming relatively soon?
Yes, there's a virtual meeting planned for October.
Okay. I will do whatever is necessary so that we can get this as an agenda item and see collectively get some of our members to, our members and those internationally to participate in a study of this.
Paul,
so if I may add,
please.
Jill?
I just wanted to say that I didn't understand what Dr. Chow said, because to me, it's not the number of punches, simply whether a woman responds differently to the punches. Does she recognize a concussion? Does she get it quicker? Does she heal quicker? So that's the only thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to be quiet.
So, Jill, one way to answer that question is, which has been looked at.
That is the question.
Right. And one way to answer that is, I completely agree with what Paul is saying. That's what Paul is saying is the scientific way to go about getting data and figuring out. But one which has been looked at with other sports is a woman's brain more susceptible to concussion than a man's brain? Is a child's brain more susceptible to concussion than an adult brain? If you look at that data like that, yes, there's some data, neurological data, to kind of suggest that women are more susceptible to concussions than a man's brain. But then there's a little bit of that leap, which is kind of a big leap, which I said. The big leap is whether you're saying we are asking for reducing the duration of the round from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, or having 2-minute rounds as compared to men who fight for 3 minutes. Does that translate into more chronic neurological problems in men who fight for a longer period of time, long history in the ring, more rounds, as compared to fighters who fight less frequently, less rounds? Yes, there's some data to suggest that also, that that fighters who have long boxing careers and have had many rounds, they probably have more chronic neurological disorders after their careers are over as compared to people who have shorter fighting careers. So there are ways to go about kind of, you can make a suggestion, but if you really want the data, this has to be some sort of a study which has to be done either prospectively or, like the doctor said, retrospectively. We look at some women fighters and look at them but we have nothing to compare the 2 versus the 3-minute rounds in women boxing per se.
Sorry, I maybe didn't understand what Jill's response was. And maybe because I joined late, I was missing some of the conversation. I thought we were trying to determine where the risk of concussion, where the most significant risk of concussion was. And so I was thinking that if we looked at the video in retrospect, we could break those time periods up and look where the most number of blows was occurring, and whether, and I think that there may be some of what Jill said in, like, if we can see that in the 3rd minute, people are slower, they may not be recognizing that they had already been hit with resulting concussion, then we would see the effects. Then they would be susceptible to increased number of blows to their body. But again, as Dr. Sethi and Dr. Wallace are saying, this is obviously a less good study to use moving forward than a prospective study. It's just that if we had an abundance of video data, it would at least get us started in thinking about it. I understand that we don't have 3-minute rounds for women, so we wouldn't be able to utilize female data, but we could at least kind of extrapolate that over time. You know, in a round, people are experiencing more hits in the 3rd minute.
Well, I think there's a combination medical/legal issue here. Is there a rational basis or even a compelling basis for treating women boxers differently than male boxers? If, for instance, it's demonstrable that women are more susceptible to concussions, trained athletes now are more susceptible to concussions. There's a rational basis for an argument. The question really that Joe was addressing is how much data is there on those topics?
Little to none.
Yeah, which is what I heard from you. But there needs to be. I think we all agree with that.
And I think that that's the sort of thing that we're hoping to be able to start. And the reason why I keep mentioning the ARP is because there's a collection of docs there who have experience, ringside physicians who have experience with writing these types of studies. And also, if we can utilize both our national and international docs, we can get information in, even as we were doing the rehydration, dehydration at 1600. And that's a fairly good number, but what we're trying to tease out may take even 2-3 times as many boxers to deal with this neurologically. Now, the part that we also know, we're talking about the brain, which we don't have a very good understanding about. Well, should I say, there's just so much more that's there. If we had ortho that was there, ortho can tell you there's a definite difference with regards to males and females in the joints. I know from doing sports medicine with regards to, especially with regards to the ACL on females, especially as we talk about at a younger age and what goes on. We can talk with regards to the shoulder that's there. Many of these injuries, talking about neck injuries, have been secondary through ortho, and talking about things that had happened. So not only was the shoulder taken out of socket, there was a concussion that was associated there. We're going to have to try to pull from some of these other specialties that have some information. But again, it's not the best of information, but I think it's moving forward. And I think that women's sports, women's boxing in particular, deserve to have some ongoing study so that we can gather this information, whether it be in the next year or the next 5 years. Any other comments with regards to that? I think all have an understanding of what needs to be done. And we'll try at this October meeting to get some good foundation and get a group of us to be the core to look at that. And are you, excuse me, the
Dr. Wallace, you're frozen again if you can hear.
Oh, shoot. But no. Robert or Ricardo?
Here.
Can you hear me now? No.
No.
We can hear you, Dr. Wallace, but I think when you start talking for longer periods, you do come in and out.
You can deactivate your camera and you will have better signal. So we will be able to listen to you, but not to see you.
Okay. The camera. Okay. William, can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay. William, can you hear me? Are you involved with the Clean Boxing program?
Say something, Paul.
Maybe you can get near to your modem because you have a very bad reception.
Heard? No? Okay. I'm neither hearing anything or I don't know if I'm being heard.
We can hear you, Dr.
Oh, you can hear me.
¿Quieres adelantarte con rotatorias?
We can hear you.
Okay. William, can you hear me? Can you see
We
if you
hear
can
you.
get his? Okay.
See, let's move.
At least I'm not hearing.
Yeah, no one is talking. Then we can hear you clear.
Okay. I know that there are some differences that have, again, we still have some ringside physicians on from across the can you give me a of what you fight from the moment that the has ended till you make a decision on either sending the to the hospital or you are you what happened?
We are losing you again. If you can get connected through your cell phone, maybe it will be better. You're muted now.
Okay.
How's that?
It's better.
Okay. I certainly apologize for satellites or whatever there may be that's there. Asking the question of Dr. Strula in Italy. You still on? Dr. Rizzo in Chicago. What about New York? Is there any ringside position with myself on?
Everyone's here.
Okay. Well, what I want to do is I'm asking whether or not they can give me some protocol that they use post-fight. Okay, so I will continue. Here in California, there are 2 ringside physicians at all times that are at the fight. I won't go through the pre-fight or even during the fight, but post-fight, there's an evaluation of the boxer in the ring. There's an evaluation of how that boxer even gets out of his stool, comes through the ropes, goes down the stairs, and walks to their dressing room. And be an ophthalmologist on your first patient. They would subject a fighter's, a boxer's, a combat participant's life in the hand a first time watching a fight. I don't know. I'll get off of that. But the point is that there takes a tremendous amount of training with regards to being a ringside physician, and there's a very good communication between the referee and the physician. The point of all of that is that my evaluation of this fighter on whether I'm going to send them to the hospital or I'm going to send them home starts from the moment that I see the fighter, even before the fight starts. If I'm concerned about the way that they are talking, for example, anxiety they may have, their inability to communicate with their corner, even in the room because of that, how they respond on when sitting in their stool in between rounds, the difference happens on them being able to take a punch in round 3 versus round 6. How many punches are they taking? How are they able to slip and slide? The more important thing for me is defense. Your ability to avoid being hurt, your ability to move away from danger is more important to me than any of the offensive tools that one might have. Those are all collectively being gathered for me as I watch them, if they can, walk down the stairs, walk to their dressing room, and then to examination on them. And yes, I go from head to toe with that, but neurologically, I am not a neurologist, but there are multiple things that I look for. And actually, I work almost like a workman's comp doctor who's working for this company, trying to, or knowing that this particular person may be trying to fake me out, lying to me about their injury. Bob have traditionally not been the most truthful of my patients throughout my career. As I state, in 31 years, I've never had one that's ever told me that they've had a headache. Not even a small one. No, I've never had one. So
in doing the post-fight, I'm also using that as a time to educate in terms of trying to encourage them to allow their brain to rest, which means not have that party that night and drink alcohol, not to be involved with any of the legal or illegal. The mandatory rest period, which is part of our post-fight paperwork of these boxers that they need to sign off, says that they are to do not for an extended period of time, whether it be 2 days, 4 days, 7 days, or more. And that's with them not being on suspension. That's the rest period that the minimum that we require before our state would go and allow them to be able to participate. There is, for those who have been hurt, over what the signs of concussions are. Again, leaning towards being safe than sorry, and having them, if they don't have a ringside, if they don't have a private physician, to again move there, to ensuring them that we have insurance that can cover them. Being able to call our commission an emergency line if necessary, if there's some questions that are there. These are the types of things that I think that need to be wherever we're having a contest. Protection of those who participate, their ability to be able to get questions answered, and giving them clear instructions on what to do if there are some come up. Again, I'd love for some of the other ringside or commissioners in other places of the world to chime in on some things that they do, some pearls of wisdom that they may have, some experiences they may have had.
Dr. Wallace, a question. It comes from way back in time. When Dr. Latham was the chief medical officer for New York,
and my mentor,
he at some point instituted a practice, maybe it was actually an actual policy, that before the fighter left the arena, we're talking about a fighter who was medically cleared after the fight. Typically, they're in the locker room for a while after that. He instituted a policy, or at least a practice, that they stopped by his table, because he wasn't necessarily the doctor that did the post-fight check, just to make sure that they had no symptoms after the check in the locker room. Well, how do you feel about that?
I think that's a fairly a good policy. I think that it's also based on the training of the doctors that you have working here in my commission in California. We commonly would tell a boxer and tell them is that they don't get their that we want them to be around for an hour. It may have been a hard fight, and we do have a suspension. We have a 30-day suspension for what's determined as a hard fight. But we have some pushback at times. But to tell them we're concerned, we want to evaluate you again at this particular time. We don't get we hold all the cards, so that happened. And I encourage the ringside docs. We have 46, I think, docs here in California. Again, err on the side of safety. If you feel uncomfortable there, I will share the story with all of you that has haunted me for years, which is there was an HBO fight, and this was back in the old days in the 1980s. Or early 90s. I can't remember exactly when it was or who it was, but it was an instance where
there was a hard fight, and I went back and then I examined the boxer, and I thought the boxer was okay. However, I had an uneasy feeling about the boxer. And I want to say, with all embarrassment, I buckled to the pressure of it being an international fight. And there was one ambulance that was at the arena. This particular promoter didn't want to get two, and our rules and regulations are it has to be an ambulance that is available for the fight going on. If I sent this fighter in the ambulance to the hospital, I made the decision that I wanted the boxer to wait until after the next fight, and I would come back and see him. Everything worked out right. The boxer went home, had a long career. It had nothing, but it was very poor judgment on my part. I should have sent the boxer based on the feeling that I had at that time. And if the promoter was too cheap to get a damn ambulance, a second ambulance there, too bad. I share that story with you, not just for me, but I tell all of my ringside docs there going through training that you have to be a doctor first. You cannot allow the pressure of promoters, boxers, even your own commission to stop that feeling that you have once you've reached a certain level of experience as a ringside doc. So I think in the long way, Pat, I don't think it's a bad thing with regards to what Dr. Lathan had instituted. But I think it comes to the individual doctors that are there and or the commissions, because commissions, you know whether or not you have strong doctors or weak doctors, or I shouldn't say that, whether you have senior doctors or junior doctors there. And you can make up in part by that by putting in some rules that may help just one boxer at one time by you instituting that when you don't have a strong contention. The other part that happens is here in California is that we never set up two junior doctors. We're always going to have at least one senior doctor. And if they're just you do so they're at least experienced. It takes a number of years to get used to. And with my good friend there in New York, I can tell you that neurologists are some of the most difficult side guys. And of course, because they're not used to watching the actual trauma and injury as it's happening. They're used to either whether it be in the emergency room or their offices, or seeing the consequences of what has happened to some trauma. But to watch it actually happen in front of them, as it is with the emergency room docs, it's a huge for them to be able to go and say, this is boxing. And that's why I take my hat off to all neurologists, all the ER docs that are out there, because you have a whole body and college of peers who don't understand what you're doing, who have no understanding on what being a physician is. Not being a ring physician. It requires training. And I certainly encourage any and all of the non-physicians that are on to have your commissions, have the doctors go and get this a minimum yearly training. We have to do it with regards to our other specialties anyway. Whether you're in dermatology or certainly in that, there's continuing medical education. And there's actually, which has been approved by the American Board of Sports Medicine, there's a continuing education in combat medicine. And we level of doctors higher across the world. I get off the soapbox there. Again, if there's anyone who has some input about things that happen post-fight that could be helpful or things to take into consideration, I certainly like to hear it. Nothing kicked in. William, are you hearing me and seeing me okay?
Yes, loud and clear and very impressive, Dr. Wallace.
Well, think about that part.
Can you say something about the clean boxing?
No, I have nothing to do with the clean boxing program.
Okay. Then how about your report with regard to your report at all with how are commissions doing, how are boxers doing now with regards to doing their weigh-ins on time, and you being able to get the medical requirements from them? Is it gotten any easier in this last year or so? Is there any effect with regards to COVID, and since we started up with boxing again?
Yes, things have actually. I would think that I deal mostly with the promoters, and they're doing very well. Now we seem to be giving a little more attention to the medicals and weigh-ins, and we are getting in things generally on time. So it's working out pretty okay. There are some minor problems with weights being a bit late, but we are making good progress with both the weights and medicals.
Okay, good. Is everyone with, well, I think that you know that the WBC is the only of the sanctioning bodies that has medical requirements across the board with regards to our MRI, with regards to neurologic, with regards to blood work, all of these, pregnancy testing, all of these are requirements of the WBC on top of whatever the commission may have. Oftentimes they're the same, and oftentimes there's commissions that have none. But we have felt very strongly for the health and safety of the participants, not to mention just what we do with regards to the performance enhancing medications or drugs that are being used, and the hundreds of others that are being taken by athletes around the world, and our collective efforts in trying to, again, keep a equal and fair playing field, but also watching out for their own safety the way.
Dr. Wallace?
Yes.
There's one other thing. Some years ago, we had decided on this. The MRI, the WBC, still validates this for 3 years. And with the way, with the scientific training that boxers are doing now, they're getting more injured and concussions and so on. I'm still hoping that we make it 1 year instead of 3.
Well, last year, when we were in Cancun, that had been resolved. Governors stated, I thought we were together when they said there was going to be a yearly.
Yes. I could remember that at a convention, you did decide that, yes, we will make it yearly, but the feedback I'm getting from the WBC, from the president, is that we're still 3 years.
We will certainly get some clarity with regards to that and get back to you, William. I think that you're absolutely correct. The types of injuries, the concussions that we see, and again, we are at the top of the mountain, and one can rarely argue that on a world champion is not too much to ask for their health.
I don't think we should look at costs in regards to safety. And the money the boxers are boxing for now would more than take care of the medicals.
Yes. Yes.
You cannot sacrifice money for safety.
Again, on that, and get that in writing, William. There anyone who can not the drug?
Sorry, lost you.
I was asking with regards to the clean drug program that we have. Everyone knows that we highly encourage, recommend, and push towards all of our athletes with the WBC being involved with being clean and being able to have randomized testing done throughout the year. That's both if they're scheduled for a fight and they're not. The program has been overwhelming success. There are challenges, I can tell you, across my desk quite frequently for the state of California. There are so many of these boxers, and many have going on are putting compete against. We want to have an even playing field. The ability of doing drug testing, I think, has certainly decreased the number of people, certainly prior to the time that we were even acknowledging that that some people couldn't afford to cheat and use illegal drugs, to a time now where they're almost over the counter. There are a number of things that we need to look at. We recently did a study within the last year or so of looking at the major nutritional places like GNC and finding out that there were multiple cases of where those things had been tainted, that there were some illegal substances in. But I think that we also have gotten reasonable. And the reasonableness is that many of the rules or regulations from commissions around the world used absolutes, such as if there's any of something. What we've been able to find is that there can be very minute amounts of substances across the board on what was thought to be and which can be shown. As I said, in doing the study, we took things off the shelf and were able to find that there can be a contaminant. I think the reasonableness of commissions to recognize that a trace amount of a substance may be reason to have further testing, but certainly should not be one where there's no scientific proof that the amount that is discovered, as we've gotten better with the quality of testing we can do, will disqualify a participant because of this trace amount that's found. There are some standards that have been set up in our commission of what the maximum amount of a trace can be before there is any type of regulatory action on it. And I think that that has worked out. There are hundreds of these types of trace amounts of different types of drugs that are out there. And I think it's been very unfair to many participants that this hard line has been drawn, which states, again, if there are any amounts versus are there any significant amounts that are in something that they may have ingested, either drinking or eating. Anyone have any comments, any thoughts, any experiences with PEDs or other drugs? We have the common one that comes up with regards to marijuana. My feeling with regards to it, I don't think that anyone can, if I were to if I were to discover or to think that somebody was under the influence, I would have the same reaction as I would if there were alcohol, let's say, on their breath or their action, and I would disqualify them for such. But having to find out that there's some trace amounts in their urine and or blood is not one in which, again, in our commission, that is
approved. However, we have a $100 fine. And I think the fine indicates where we think that the importance is versus other commissions. Versus,
I do
versus
have
other commissions that are charging literally in the hundreds of thousands of dollars by finding a marijuana that may even be legal in their state.
well, I do have a dissenting view, but not on that point. There has been some overzealousness for sure. But the dissenting view that I have is there are international standards. And I do not think it's the best process to have individual states, in this case, differ from the international standards. WADA, the WADA standards are well known. There's a process if someone is inadvertently, we'll call it dosed, actually. That's happened. But it's very difficult, I think, to differ from the internationally accepted standards because then you run into a hodgepodge of things, hodgepodge of regulations. And frankly, I've been arguing against that for years because I think you have to be uniform. I don't think a different standard should apply in California for PEDs than in Nevada, than in New Jersey, than in New York. So I always advocate the WADA standard. And that's, of course, subject to what exists is the right to try and explain it. There have been successful cases there.
Right, and I have a lot of respect with regards to WADA and the science that they and the time, energy, and money that they have. I don't know whether or not their punishment is one that I find to reasonable. But that's, you know, as you said, that
to be very clear, I wasn't talking about their level of punishment, just the prohibited drugs themselves.
But the interesting thing with regards to WADA, if you look at where, for example, and I won't go through the detail, there have been many drugs where WADA now has changed what their standard is. And yes, we've had here in California, we've had 2 boxers, for example, go who were suspended. Now, the WADA changed on it. We understand now that that wasn't important. So there's a discrepancy there, and I'm not so much bothered by that. I applaud them for getting better and better, but I would like to see again some, in the words you use, uniformity in terms of what you declare. And that's, for me, that's been one of the problems with regards to WADA. Not, again, the science that they do, but connected with that, they are very determined. And I think that's outside of the medical part, so I'll stay in my lane. But there's some issues there. But it's not an easy task no matter what. But I think that we need to, again, try to get an equal playing field as we can. And that will be helpful as we move forward. The sanctioning body that is progressive and proactive, we're not waiting on us whether they're going to do something to their boxer or not, or to that boxer.
as it goes with wearing the green belt, we have our own rules and regulations that will go. And oftentimes that punishment is more severe than the commission itself, the local commission. William, is there a report that you'd like to make on anything? I don't want to leave you out. Small break. Is there any other medical topic? We've got two folks would like to bring up. Thoughts about some other medical aspects of boxing.
Dr. Wallace, I think we can speak a little bit about the sparring knockouts. We need, when they're doing sparring in the gym, and we don't have that kind of information sometimes.
Well, that's one of the two things that sort of was left on the agenda, and it only makes sense the fact that we'd love to know that information. Again, I can always bring things back to I have been blessed in all of these years, and all the different fights that I've done. I haven't experienced a ringside fatality on anything that I've worked. I don't think it has anything to do with me being any better, smarter, or the rest. I think collectively, I've been protected by the state of California on the mandatory communication between the referee, that I have a doctor who's sitting right next to me that throughout the course of a fight that I can communicate with. I can say things that I'm concerned about. I can have feedback the same way it is when I'm in the operating room. So I don't look at it in that aspect, but I remember when I was doing amateur fights again back in the 1980s, and it was the first time that I had experienced someone having to go to the hospital. And I had done the weigh-in on this young man, and everything was fine. There was nothing. He was there. His coach had his arm around him. He did the physical, and it was fine. Round one, not much action again. Amateurs, dancing around. You take one swing and you back up, and you come forward and you back up. He probably got 2 jabs that happened the whole round. Round two, there is no jabs that happen. He's dancing around the ring. They go for almost that whole minute, and there's no punch. And then there's one jab at the end. He stumbles to his corner. He sits down in the chair, slumps down in his chair. He's on the floor. This is back before cell phones and the rest. We had to put money in the pay phone. We had to call the fire department. The fire department came and took this kid. He ended up having a bleed. They were able to evacuate it. He was fine and never boxed again, as far as I know. But it was my experience there. What happened? What happened was we discovered afterwards, because his mom started crying and the rest, and told us that he had been in a boating accident 3 weeks prior to that. He was jet skiing and got knocked out, went to the hospital. They released him. He didn't tell his coach. He didn't tell any of the people he was training with what happened on the accident while on the vacation he had. Got back into the gym and actually was sparring in the gym, but there's no incident. The reason for the story, stuff happens. And I've come to believe that rarely is it something that I'm seeing during this 12-round fight, or whatever amount of rounds it is, that is actually what caused the injury. It may be one that the accumulation of everything was brought about at that time, but there's often never a situation where I see that they've accumulated so much damage that this type of injury occurs. And I've been through some pretty tough wars, in particular there's just been some very, very tough ones where I've gone back and I've looked at the fight and I've gone, what type of idiot is that ringside doc? Why didn't you stop that fight? But while I'm sitting there, there's a completely different scenario. And that's why I'm so glad that I have another doc who's sitting next to me that I can bounce this off of and go. I'm sorry, I'm just sort of rattling on there. But of course, we would like to know what's happening. Every time, oftentimes we'll get a disgruntled sparring partner who gets thrown out of camp and say, yeah, you know, such and such. But I don't know how we're going to regulate such. I think it's a matter of education that we can continue to ask that trainers, promoters, whomever, let us know what has happened in the gym. It's not an unusual situation where literally someone's not knocked out in the gym. And I've heard almost on every champion where there's been something, if that didn't happen exactly, they've gotten their bell rung, but they don't tell anybody before. As a ringside doc, I can tell you that they will throw you underneath the bus as soon as the fight is over. Oh yeah, well, you know, I was knocked out 2 weeks ago when I was sparring, but you know, we came on and did that. Or yeah, I got hit in the head with such and such, and I was, and you know, they lied through their medical form, which asks have they had any injury. It is not an atypical situation for someone to say, oh yes, I sprained my ankle last week when I was running. Now, of course, we're not so worried about the ankle. We're worried more about the brain. But this is a situation, as I mentioned earlier, which is almost like a workers' comp. These people are coming and not being the most truthful. In fact, it's an adversarial relationship between the ringside doc when we're doing the weigh-ins and the boxers themselves. So we're trying to extract information from them as they have spent and have been trained on how to hide a particular injury. Way I don't know what we are able to do other than to encourage if you've been hurt. And we did the posters. And I think that that's another idea that we may need to explore more, talking about concussions, talking about the way that the boxer might feel. Those whole issues of bell rung, blacked out for a short period of time. What is it that you're supposed to do during that? Oftentimes, again, if you're a sparring partner, you don't want to admit that these things are happening. You'll lose a payday. But what sort of things should they do? And I think the poster education might be the best that we can put in all the gyms around the world. We can send this as a digital educational piece to commissions around the world, and gyms can just print those things out. Certainly would like some other thoughts or ideas about getting information or educating boxers about injuries that occur in the gym.
Doc, I don't think enough trainers and managers take responsibility there to tell commissions. I think that's an issue. I'm afraid I've got to sign off, and I thank you very much for the effort that you've put in today, all of you. Thank you.
All right, we're down to our to the nitty gritty. To our few warriors who are hanging in here. Any input? Is there anything that someone like to say on that topic or any medical topic?
Are you hearing me, Dr. Wallace?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what I was suggesting is something like a gym diary. What's the possibility of making it compulsory that boxers have a book at the gym where when they enter the gym, by the time they enter, they put their weight, immediately they weigh. Everything that they do, so much sparring, so much shadow boxing, so much skipping, so everything is entered by the trainer in that book. and his weight when he's about to leave. Anything that goes in during his training is entered in that book for the day. I use a different page for different days, so that would give anybody, any authority really, that needs to know the relevant information that would be able to assist that boxer or assist in preventing, follow-up injuries and things like that.
I think there's some good details in that. Would you suggest that there's a universal type of book?
Yes, something that it should be a mandatory thing in the gym. A gym should make it mandatory that each boxer trains there has this book. He leaves it in the gym. He doesn't take it away. The book is kept in the gym. When he enters the gym, he put the time he enters, the date, and his weight before training. Then he enters everything that he does in the gym and everything that happens to him in the gym. And then the book out time and weight. That would give any authority that needs to know any relevant information concerning the safety of that boxer and his training methods and so.
How would we enforce that? You were saying compulsory.
Well, if the gym can make it one of their rules, a gym rule that each boxer must have this. That's the only possible way I see of making it like legal or.
I think it would be. I think dealing with the level of competitors that we have in the pro, especially folks who are having private gyms and things like that, it might be difficult to mandate.
Yeah, it might be difficult to implement that. But boxers should not be bigger than the game or bigger than the sport or bigger than the safety.
Right, and that's why I think along with what you're saying, educating those boxers about when they do get hurt on what they're supposed to do is valuable information. It is, does it mean that you go out and say, okay, I'm not going to spar, but I'm going to just do mileage in the next few days? Not understanding that increase of blood flow actually may be contributing to the concussive state. And what they should be doing is laying quietly, minimizing involvement with regards to electronics, resting their brain. That's a hard thing, especially for young people to do. But it's something I think that's in consideration. It's something that I think that we should encourage each individual, not just the gym, but each individual to be able to carry a diary and say whether it was, they got their bell rung or it was a tough sparring day on that day. Yeah. I would love for boxers just to keep a diary on their whole training and in between, just a daily diary on how they do.
Yeah, that's a further follow-up on it. Yeah. But
all right. Are there any other mandatory or topics that we were supposed to have discussed? I think we went through. We didn't do clean boxing because there's no representative that was here. I think we went through the other four.
The thing I'm trying to do also with the weights, Dr. Walsh, is that the current weights of the boxers, which we're trying to get now, will help us control the dehydration process that they go through. So I'm hoping that we will get, it is working. Boxers are sending in their current weights, and it's helping, I think.
Good.
Keep a control on how they reduce their weight.
We're trying to encourage folks without major punitive damage to be healthier, to increase their athletic ability by being in better shape.
That's what you said earlier. You said that earlier, and that is that's the crucial, the whole thing for them to keep themselves in some sort of shape continuously.
That's it. Is there anyone on the line where in a commission right now where there's boxing going on?
Say that again.
I'm wondering during this period of COVID, this pandemic, are there any commissions? We have just started 2 weeks ago here in the state of California of having non-audience boxing events. And I wanted to find out, are there any others that are on the line who might give some pearls of wisdom? Right now, our routine is that 2 weeks prior to a fight, we're having a boxer do a COVID test. Then the day of the weigh-in, they're doing a COVID test. I should say, excuse me, the day that they arrive, this is the day before, they're doing a COVID test.
Yes, what is happening?
So there's a minimum of 2 tests that they take. And in some circumstances, there are 3 tests that they may take. We've had a situation where there was a, excuse me, where there's an individual who was found to be positive. And although the Centers of Disease Control speak of being in close contact with someone who has been exposed to COVID for 15 minutes or more, of you being at a higher risk and you then needing to be quarantined. But how can you check that? I mean, how can someone say, oh, no, I wasn't around anyone else? We've done that by doing a subsequent test, even on the day of. So there have been some individuals who have had 3 tests 2 weeks prior, when they arrived, and also the day of the fight to be negative. It has worked. The bubble has worked. We have found some people who were asymptomatic and tested positive. We were able to, because of the isolation, we were able to get them out. It has been the promoter's responsibility to provide a place for them if they've come from, for example, out of state. We do not want anyone to be taking an airplane and going back and they've been found to be positive. There has been an occasion where we found someone positive who attended on their own. They drove their personal vehicle. We had them, again, asymptomatic, drive back to where they came and then to quarantine themselves. But the sport can continue even with this pandemic. There are safe ways in which to do it. And we are glad to provide a template on how it's been done. And we have been able to follow others. We've been able to watch what's gone on with UFC. We've been able to participate with what's gone on in other commissions as they've gone, and we've all learned from one another. We do need to keep not only the competitors, but all of those in the competitors' camp. And let's not forget about our officials. Our officials need to be kept safe, which includes, if you're going to put them in the bubble, everybody from TV on needs to be in that bubble and to protect those right now. Now, fortunately, we have relatively healthy people, but we have a number of senior citizens who, by senior, I mean over the age of 55, in which I am clearly one, who are at a greater risk. And I think that we need to demand that there are certain safety standards for their health and safety also. I'm as much concerned about our WBC officials as I am for any boxer, perhaps even more, given the fact that we know that they are at a higher risk.
Yeah. Yes, I've been getting reports from when I get in the weights and so on. I'm getting reports over the bubbles, which seem not seem. It is, the bubble is working. Once the boxer and nobody is let out, or if they do come out on their own, they're sent away. They're not accepted back. So the bubble is working good. It's a good. Once they're strict with it, and they are strict with it, as far as I see.
Oh yeah, there's zero tolerance.
That's right.
If you come out of your room, if you leave, you're finished. You're out.
He's out. Yeah. So it's working. It's working good.
We're gonna have a fight next week. Not this weekend, but the other one, but the next one. We're gonna try to do the bubble and everything. The only issues we have the 60 years old instead of 55, because we had some political issues with the government because they say here in Mexico is 60 years the age that they suppose they cannot be in working.
So they're actually stopping officials or anyone else?
No, if you are more than 60.
If you're more than 60, okay. Yes. All right. No, they haven't come with any age restrictions here, but I'm certainly more concerned about those old people, in which I'm one.
Well, and the other thing, good thing that we have is most of the boxers that they are gonna fight next week, they already have COVID like 2 months ago.
Well, we don't know if we can get it again. Up to now, they haven't determined yet if you had it before, you can still you're exempt.
They're gonna have 2 exams. One when they get into the bubble, and the other one in the fast test the day of the meeting.
Yes. And if nothing else, if we're going to have as we have a public sport, it's going out to the general public. Again, being a leader in the industry, we have to show that we are concerned and are doing something appropriate with regards to health and safety. But that's been our MO from the very beginning. So,
Dr. Wallace, what about the judges? How far from the ring are they? How far?
6 feet.
Okay.
They're 6 feet and they're wearing eye protection and they're wearing masks.
Okay.
The judges are closer, but they again are fully protected.
Okay, with shields and masks, the judges.
Yeah, shield and mask, yes. Well, if there's no other information, I think that I won't drag this on for everyone. I love talking about boxing and medical safety, period. I certainly welcome anyone who wants to have any other discussion, any other topics that are there. Let's give you a good 15, 20 seconds. And if not, we'll cut this a bit short.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is very fruitful. You've put in much in the past hour and a half or two. I think much has been accomplished by this discussion.
Well, I appreciate that. And in an era where we're not having very much participation because of COVID, I think it's giving us a good opportunity to reevaluate everything that we currently do. It's never something that's in stone. There are things that are changing all the time. And this is actually giving us some time to, again, look at what we have, to reevaluate it, to make some corrective changes and moving forward. So I'm hoping that we're able to use this time to be even better on the other side of the pandemic. I'm hoping that our participants, our boxers have learned ways in which they can train safely, perhaps getting in a lot of road work. You don't have to worry about catching anything when you're running. So, I'm hoping that they are in better shape. My greatest fear, I will admit, is for people who are not training, but have gotten positions based on things that were pre-COVID and may not be in the type of condition that they should be to participate. One person has really been training, the other person really hasn't been training. So when we talk about big shifts with regard to weight hydration and dehydration, I'm very, very specific and particular when I'm looking at boxers and doing their evaluation right now. I'm looking closer at with regards to heart rate. I'm looking closer with regards to blood pressure because I'm not sure that they are at the same level of training that they were prior to this pandemic. And I certainly don't want anyone, but especially not a WBC fight, to take place and there's somebody who is faking the funk, as my kids would say. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end this committee meeting. Thank you very much. You've been quite helpful with regards to all of the technical things, and I think it's remarkable we had so many people participate from around the world and be able to put this on. And looking forward to actually doing it again in the next few months. We need to get the task force together. We need to get back to where we were. Those issues that we've had on the table are still there. And hopefully we have a little bit more time to address them. So thank you. Thank you, the WBC. Wakanda. Yeah, and everyone have a safe and healthy. See you soon.
Okay.
See you soon,
all the
everybody.
best. Keep safe.